of several project activities and international mobility programs, and she has participated in numerous conferences and scientific seminars in both Ukraine and abroad. She is the author of numerous scientific articles, and her research interests relate to modern methods of teaching foreign languages, political discourse, political debates and propaganda, linguistic manipulation, and lingual pragmatists, as well as intercultural communication. So this is actually the title of her first lecture that she will deliver this week at the Open University of Cyprus. And the title of today's lecture is Intercultural Communication and Intercultural Competencies, Intercultural Experience and the Case of Ukraine. So we're very happy and honored to have you here today. And now, Dr. Losieva, the floor is yours.
So thanks a lot. Hello, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for introducing me. So thank you, Open University of Cyprus, for welcoming here for 5 days of my mobility, which is, as it was already mentioned, organized in the framework of Erasmus program. So for me, it's a kind of new experience as well to be here and to have 5 classes with the students and the community of this university. The experience is a bit new if to take into consideration the fact that the university is working in online format. So that's why I find it interesting and challenging as well. So I'm from the city of Lviv, which is located in the western part of Ukraine, and I am from Ivan Franko National University of Lviv. I work at the Department of Foreign Languages, Faculty of International Relations, and today's presentation is about intercultural communication, as intercultural communication is the topic which is on the list of my scientific interest as well. So before we start dealing with the presentation, I would like to say that I hope for some discussion, for your participation and your involvement into our today's lecture. So, and I will be very grateful for your participation and involvement. And I hope and I think maybe the topic of intercultural communication also appeals to you, because if to speak about the topic of intercultural communication, I would say that it's something which is really close for me today, because yesterday I came to Cyprus for the first time, and from the very first moments, I found really some moments and aspects of everything, how life is organized here in Cyprus, a bit unusual for me, but in positive meaning, unusual and a bit not so easy to understand. So, by the way, how do you think? So, I would like you to participate. So, how do you think? What are like the things or the aspects of life in foreign countries which can be at first a bit unusual for a person? Maybe anybody of you would like to give some hints to highlight on the things which maybe you found unusual and interesting for you when you were in a foreign country. Okay? Because as for me, there were some things which I found interesting. First of all, it was the way how traffic is organized in Cyprus. Then it was something related to the animals. For example, too many cats everywhere. So then yesterday I also noticed that something is special about donkeys here in Cyprus. Yeah, so maybe you know what is special about donkeys, but I was already told that donkeys in Cyprus are considered to be bigger and higher in sizes. That's why they are of special like value and interest. because you can find lots of like souvenirs with donkeys. So lots of things which can be taken into consideration while we speak about intercultural communication. So, and intercultural communication is not only about communication in our everyday life and not only about those things which we find a bit strange and unusual when we find ourselves in like a foreign environment. It's also about different competences which we have to build up in order to communicate with people from different cultures and countries more effectively and easily. So it's also about the experience and the case of my country where I'm from. So let's have a look at some of the slides and start with our presentation. So nowadays we can say that modern world and modern society tends to globalization, which involves openness and tolerance towards other cultures. So this tendency is often considered to be positive, as ideally it would help erase cultural stereotypes and as a result reduce hostility between people of different mentalities. So what should we be aware is that we share this planet with almost 8 billion of other people who belong to thousands of cultural groups and people who speak thousands of different languages. Furthermore, we live in the age of modern technologies which allow us to communicate with practically any person on the planet, regardless of the location, language, or culture. The rapid development of modern technologies put great impact into integration of different nations. So as a result, it is extremely difficult to live in modern world without necessity to be connected with other people. However, despite the fact that the internet allows us to communicate without boundaries, people still experience numerous communicative problems. So all this makes us think that there are definite regulations of intercultural communication that should be considered. So let me outline the main points of today's presentation. So our attention will be focused on such issues as, so first of all, what makes for good intercultural communication and what is meant by intercultural communication? What is intercultural awareness? Then, why are diversity issues important? What are the most striking cultural differences that people face when working with people from diverse communities and in international settings? Then, the important thing is about intercultural competences. What are they? How to create them, how to build them up, and how to develop them. So that will be the main points to be highlighted. So the next thing is to have a look at the very term of intercultural communication. So what is meant by intercultural communication? The term represents broad ideas that are difficult to express in just one way. So firstly, I would like to provide several commonly accepted academic and applied definitions to clarify the concept and process. So firstly, the intercultural communication refers to the communication between people from two different countries. Intercultural communication is a symbolic, interpretive, transactional, contextual process in which people from different cultures create shared meanings. Intercultural communication refers to the effects of communication behavior when different cultures interact together. Hence, one way of viewing intercultural communication is as communication that unfolds in symbolic intercultural spaces. So, in our increasingly connected and globalized world, the issue of intercultural competence and intercultural communication in general is becoming more and more crucially important. We can distinguish between verbal, non-verbal, and paraverbal intercultural communication. So when we speak about verbal intercultural communication, so here we speak about the way how to greet people, how to say goodbye, how to interact with people verbally, how to sound polite, and how to communicate and speak in the way that will not be strange, offensive, funny, or ridiculous. Speaking about nonverbal intercultural communication, so here we have to consider gestures, body language, facial expressions, so everything that shows our reaction to some moments which we find interesting, a bit strange, or even unexpected. At the same time, if to speak about paraverbal communication, it's about the volume. It's about the way we sound. It's about the way how others hear us. Because it's also very important to organize the way others hear us in consideration with all moments which show our reaction. The next thing which should be taken into consideration is hotspots. So it's like hot topics or hot issues where we have to be accurate, where we have to be very attentive to the peculiarities and different aspects of multicultural society. So we have to be very careful with criticism. So in the situations in which we have to express our dissatisfaction or disapproval, we have to know how to do it, not to offend others. So criticizing, apologizing as well. We have to know how to do it appropriately. Making compliments, not in every culture, not in every society, making a compliment is considered to be a kind of positive aspect of communication. So representatives of different nations and cultures can react both positive and not very positive to people who just make compliments. But at the same time, very often people who make compliments, they think that the compliment will make the atmosphere friendlier, warmer, and they want to make it and produce some warmer environment. So making requests, small talks, saying hello, saying goodbye, all these aspects and issues are important. So when you are with a person for the first, for the second, or the third time, you have to know what are the appropriate topics to speak about if you want just to start the conversation. And of course, to say hello, to say goodbye, it's also a kind of issue we have to be aware of. Then, while communicating with people from diverse cultures, gestures or body language should be considered, as it was already mentioned when we mentioned nonverbal intercultural communication. So it is estimated that in the West, up to 70% of communication is physical interaction, such as body language. In other parts of the world, the figure is even higher. So body language and physical gestures are one of the most important and very often misunderstood aspects of communication. From posture of tone of your voice, it's important to learn which gesture and other forms of physical communication are appropriate and which aren't. So as we know, even the way people say hello, people greet each other, can differ in different countries and in different cultures. So some people just say hello, hi, others will give you a hand, and there are people who will even bow while meeting you. So it depends a lot and makes great difference. So we can outline 4 key components of intercultural body language. So the first important key component is personal space, which is how close people are when they are talking. So the distance is really important. In the West, people generally stand apart from arm's length. So it's like a tradition. An arm's length will be the enough distance to stand apart from the person who is next to you. But, for example, in Arab and Latin cultures, people stand together as close as 6 inches. And it is important to be comfortable with close quarters. Backing up would be taken as a sign of rejection and insulting. So, and if to speak about personal space, I would say that a few years ago when COVID-19 started and we all experienced pandemic, there was like a list of strict rules and regulations to follow, to keep to, and one of the rules and regulations was to keep personal distance in public spaces, especially in usually overcrowded places. People had to keep personal distance. And I can say, even from my own experience, from the experience of my country where I'm from, that it was not so easy for Ukrainian people to keep the distance, as commonly we do not keep great attention to distance when we are in the public spaces. But at the same time, people in Scandinavian countries had no problems with keeping the distance during the COVID pandemic, and it was explained by very simple thing that for Scandinavians, it's just a normal thing. It's a common practice to keep personal space in any place where they are, in a public place, in some way in the crowded places. They always keep the personal space. They respect their own personal space and respect the personal space of others. And they don't get closer to people than it is considered and allowed. So personal space. Then the next key component of intercultural body language is physical contact. Personal space and touching also affect communication. For example, in Latin America, 2 men might greet each other with a hearty embrace known as an abrazo. So it's a common practice for them just to embrace each other. So in contrast to people from Latin America, many Asians are averse to touching. They will shake hands on first meetings, but they avoid physical contact, and it's a common practice for them. In some cultures, touch between men and women, even a handshake, can be highly sensitive and should be avoided. So in case of Ukraine, so people do not avoid embraces, they do not avoid hugs, handshakes. It's a normal thing for people to communicate through gestures and not avoid physical contact. So speaking about eye contact, it will be another issue, another main component. For example, in the societies such as the United States, it's highly regarded and it's considered to be a sign of sincerity, eye contact, I mean. So if people do not avoid having an eye contact, so they express their respect and sincerity to each other. But in other cultures, it can be considered rude and even can be avoided. In India or Japan, for example, looking a senior in the eye is disrespectful. For even the age of the person with whom you are, to have an eye contact has to be taken into consideration. The next thing is about gestures. So it's considered that if you are somewhere in a completely new environment, if you find yourself somewhere in a foreign state, it's advisable to avoid any offhand gestures in order not to make a kind of embarrassing situation both for you and for people with whom you are together. So in intercultural communication, body language gestures have different meanings, and the meaning is different in different countries. Even the same gesture can have different meanings in different countries. So for example, in the USA, a thumb, which is up, indicates approval or agreement. But in a number of countries around the world, this gesture is a kind of obscene. It's kind of offensive gesture. In many countries, holding your thumb up can mean one thing, but in parts of Asia it means five. For example, when all your fingers are up. So, speaking about gestures, the obvious thing is that we have to be attentive and have to take into consideration all the components which make successful communication in the society where we are for the first time. So to review the foremost points of physical communication, so we can mention the following. So personal space barriers, so we have to learn how to be comfortable with people who are close to us. The appropriateness of touching is viewed differently, and that should be taken into consideration, and we should keep in mind this aspect. The meaning of eye contact differs as well, so be aware of local decorum, be aware of the environment and the society. And finally, it's best to avoid hand gestures, which might be a kind of taboo in different cultures. So continue with gestures. We can say that among, for example, the representatives of Islamic and Buddhist culture, it is not acceptable to touch people or give business cards, for example, with the left hand. So that is important, and people should be aware of that. So pointing the finger at somebody or something in most countries is also a sign of ill manners and should be avoided. Knocking on forehead is a gesture that for a great deal in European countries, France, Italy, Germany, and Ukraine as well, means a non-verbal belief in the stupidity of a person to whom the sign can be addressed. So in Spain and in the United Kingdom, on the other hand, this sign means the conviction of one's own cleverness. So one sign, one gesture, but completely different meanings and ways of interpretation. Interestingly, in the Netherlands, everything depends on the way the finger is placed. If the finger is placed vertically to the right side of the hand, it means that interlocutor is convinced of his or her intelligence. While if the finger is placed horizontally, it means that a person is convinced of someone's stupidity as well. So if to speak about raised thumb, for most nations, it's a kind of positive experience. On the other hand, in the Eastern countries, it can be considered kind of offensive. Cultural differences related to the understanding of time and space. So it's enough with gestures and body language. So what about time and space? These are two aspects which also should be taken into consideration when people are among the representatives of different cultures and diversity. The way people perceive time and space is important. Nowadays, in Western cultures, time is measured with clocks. We have the impression that it is moving forward, and we distinguish between present, past, and future. Time can also be cyclic, which means that its main feature is the repetitiveness resulting, for example, from the repetitiveness of seasons or moon phases. Each time cycle involves the performance of specific activities assigned to that period. In different countries, the citizens also have different approaches to space. Let's have a look at how the cultural differences associated with the approach to time and space, and how different nationalities approach to time. Some cultures attach great importance to time, punctuality, and schedules. These are monochronic cultures. In these cultures, people stick to previously accepted plans, they rarely get late, and being late is considered unwelcoming practice. Meetings are reluctant to be translated, and in general, the principle time is money obtains. So in such cultures, as I have already mentioned, they are called monochronic cultures. Timing is important, and punctuality is important as well. Time is measured, planned, and is important. Representatives of such cultures will expect other people to respect their time and to be punctual. Monochronic societies are mostly Protestant countries, according to a number of researchers, it was outlined like that, but also Japan and South Korea among those societies which can be considered monochronic countries, which think that time is important and punctuality is praised. At the same time, polychronic cultures function differently. People watch the meetings, time commitments, and schedules with less importance. And it is assumed that people decide when an event begins or ends and what course it takes. Spontaneous changes or arrangements, deadlines are allowed, as well as late arrivals, which are not negatively evaluated, because it's like a common thing and no one will negatively evaluate such practice. In such cultures, the time for conversation is when both parties meet in one place, and it is not necessarily that the time should be fixed beforehand. In polychronic cultures, time is more fluid and not so precisely measured and managed. Plans can be changed spontaneously because in these cultures preference is given to interpersonal relationships rather than to performed tasks. Many cultures in Latin America, Africa, Asia, and Arabia belong to polychronic countries. Especially it's about the countries located in the southern part of the world. So if we speak about Central Europe and Ukraine as well, so being late for a business meeting or for an appointment is considered impolite. You should be there a few minutes before the meeting. Things look completely different in southern countries, as I have already mentioned, such as Italy, Spain, for example, Mexico. And the interesting thing for me, personally for me, is how about Cyprus? How do people here handle with time? Is it important to be punctual? Is it unwelcome to be late or not? Maybe any one of our participants will give a short comment on how people in Cyprus deal with time and time management. because as for me, it's a kind of new experience, and actually I am not sure about it. So then, speaking about other aspects of intercultural communication, we should mention space, handling of space. So representatives of different cultures use space in a specific way to talk to other people. Taking this criterion into account, the researchers distinguish between contact cultures, where touch is closeness and closeness are natural, and distance cultures, where the appropriate distance between people talking to each other must be maintained. So, and we have already mentioned some of the aspects about space and keeping it in mind is important. So if to distinguish between contact cultures and distance cultures, we can say that contact cultures include primarily the representatives of southern countries, again, Italians, Spaniards, Arabs. Distance cultures are the cultures of the north. So people are usually more reserved there, and like the personal space is of higher importance for them. The cultural, and if we speak about Ukraine, in Ukrainian culture, we also prefer to keep a personal distance of at least the length of an upright arm, for example. And what about Cyprus? The question is open. So distance and personal space. Speaking about the next aspect, which is important and should be considered, is just touch. Individual nations are also differentiated by their consent to touch during a conversation or business negotiation. For example, Americans, Italians, and again Spaniards, they often slap on their shoulders or squeeze their partners or interculture during a conversation. Different attitude is presented, for example, by the British, who are reserved, and they are a kind of fragile nation in the form of communication. In European countries, tactile contact is decreasing from the south of Europe to north. In Romance countries, it is popular and understandable. In countries of Central Europe, it's occasional, whereas in countries of Northern Europe, such practice is very rare and unwelcome. So any touch is a kind of rare practice and can be not so welcome. Handshake is also one of the aspects to be mentioned. Different nations, representatives of different cultures, have different types of handshakes. For example, in Arab countries, it's considered to be gentle, repeated, and long. Representatives of Asian countries, they tend to have very delicate and rarely given handshake. If to speak about Koreans, it is moderately strong. Another nation which was taken to research the aspect of handshake were the Americans, and it was found out that their handshakes are strong, but at the same time rarely given. Germans are those whose handshake will be strong and energetic and often given. If to speak about French, they tend to have their handshakes to be light, quick, and often given. British, we can say that their handshakes are moderate in all respects. And if to speak about Latins, like representatives of South, their handshakes strong and often given. If to speak about Ukrainians, I would say that we are somewhere at the same level or at the same position as Germans. So Ukrainians tend to give strong and energetic handshake, and it's often given. It's a common way to greet the person when you meet him or her. So what about Cyprus again? For me, it's like a question to be investigated or the topic to be researched. Speaking about intercultural communication, the issue of intercultural competences is also to be considered. So competences are those like elements which make our communication successful, acceptable, and easy to be understood. So, but how can we define intercultural competence? So first of all, it's the ability to communicate effectively and appropriately in international situations, based on one's intercultural knowledge, skills, and attitudes. So secondly, it's a set of cognitive, effective, and behavioral skills and characteristics that support effective and appropriate interaction in a variety of cultural contexts. Thirdly, it's the ability to communicate effectively and appropriately with people of other cultures, to communicate and interact with people who are linguistically and culturally different from oneself. Thus, there is no a single doubt that intercultural competence is a valuable asset today, where connections around the world have become commonplace. Every day, both at work and in our private lives, we interact with people from diverse countries and cultures who are likely to have different values and beliefs than we do. This is where intercultural competence comes in useful. So what makes for good intercultural communication? There are numerous components of intercultural competences. The basic components include knowledge, skills, culture, attitude, and communication. In addition to them, motivation and tolerance for uncertainty can be included. Knowledge supplements motivation and is an important part of building intercultural competences. Knowledge includes self and other awareness, so self-awareness and other awareness, mindfulness, cognitive flexibility, and building knowledge of our own cultures, identities, and communication patterns takes more than just passive experience. Developing cultural self-awareness often requires us to get out of comfort zone, and that is important for every person to be able to leave their comfort zone and be able to communicate outside of it. Listening to people who are different from us is a key component of developing self-knowledge. This may be uncomfortable because we may realize that people think of our identities differently than we thought. The most effective way to develop other knowledge is by direct and thoughtful encounters with other cultures. Developing self and other knowledge is an ongoing process that will continue to adapt and grow as we encounter new experiences. So as it was mentioned in a previous slide, so knowledge is a constituent element of intercultural competence. Then goes skills. Skills refer to such aspects as listening and observing. So a person has to be able to listen, to observe, evaluate the situation with patience and reservedness, and it's about the ability to view the world from other perspectives. And of course, attitudes. That is also important. Speaking about attitudes, we should take into consideration respect, which is about the ability to value other cultures. It's about openness. It's about our ability to withhold judgment. It's about curiosity, the ability to view difference as something completely new and as a chance to learn something, as a possibility to gain some new experience and knowledge. And of course, it's discovery, which is about tolerance and ambiguity. Initially, a person's motivation for communication with people from other cultures must be considered as well. Motivation refers to the root of a person's desire to foster intercultural relationships and can be intrinsic and extrinsic, according to the researchers into this sphere. So intrinsic and extrinsic motivation is distinguished. Put it simply, if a person isn't motivated to communicate with people from different countries, then the components of intercultural communication competence don't really matter. So, but on the other hand, if a person has a healthy curiosity that drives them toward intercultural encounters in order to learn more about self and others, then there is a foundation from which to build additional competence, relevant attitudes, and skills. So this motivation, which is intrinsic motivation, makes intercultural communication a voluntary, rewarding, and lifelong learning process. On the other hand, motivation can also be extrinsic, meaning that the desire for intercultural communication is driven by an outside reward like money, power, recognition, or any other benefits. While both types of motivation can contribute to intercultural competencies, context may further enhance or impede a person's motivation to communicate across cultures. Motivation and knowledge can inform us as we gain new experience through them, but the way we feel in the moment of intercultural encounters is also important. So that's why tolerance for uncertainty is to be mentioned. Tolerance for uncertainty refers to an individual's attitude towards comfort in uncertain situations. So it's about the level of comfort, I would say, in uncertain situations. Some people perform better in uncertain situations than others, and intercultural encounters often bring up uncertainty. Whether communicating with someone of a different gender, race, or nationality, we are often wondering what should we do, what should we say, or what we shouldn't do or say. Situations of uncertainty most often become clearer as they progress, but the anxiety that an individual with a low tolerance for uncertainty feels may lead them to leave the situation or otherwise communicate in a less competent manner. Individuals with a higher tolerance for uncertainty may exhibit more patience, waiting on waiting for new information to become available, or even seeking out information by themselves, which may then increase the understanding of the situation and lead to a more successful outcome. Individuals who are intrinsically motivated toward intercultural communication may have a higher level of tolerance for uncertainty. In that way, curiosity leads them to engage with others who are different because they find the self and other knowledge gained rewarding. It is obvious that we need to develop effective intercultural competence, which requires the following attributes. So first of all, it's respect for and appreciation of other cultures, worldviews, and communication styles. Then it's understanding of other people's behaviors, cultural customs, and ways of thinking, regardless of how unusual or strange they may appear. The ability and willingness to acknowledge and accept different behaviors and ideas in a non-judgmental way, especially opinions and perspectives with which we do not necessarily agree. Awareness of our own biases and behaviors in order to respond in a culturally appropriate manner is also the issue, a kind of attribute required for developing effective intercultural competence. And last but not least, it's curiosity, flexibility, and willingness to adapt and be open to different ways of thinking and behaving. The next thing which should be taken into consideration is the way how intercultural competences can be built and achieved. Two main ways to build intercultural competences are through experimental learning and reflective practices. We must first realize that competence isn't just one thing. Part of being competent means that you can assess new situations and adapt your existing knowledge to new contexts. What it means to be competent will depend on your physical location, your role, and your life stage, among other things. Sometimes we will know or we will be able to figure out what is expected of us in a given situation, but sometimes we need to act in unexpected ways to meet the needs of a situation. Competence enables us to better cope with unexpected, adapt to the non-routine, and connect to uncommon frameworks. Intercultural competence is rather a set of tools to be used than a list of rules just to be followed. So it's a set of rules to be used towards building up an effective dialogue, a tool or a set of tools to be used among world leaders, politicians, and diplomats, and it's a set of tools to be used among top managers, tour agents, representatives of business, and so on. So 3 ways to cultivate intercultural competence are to foster attitudes that motivate us, discover knowledge that informs us, and develop skills that enable us. To foster attitudes that motivate us, we must develop a sense of wonder about the culture. This sense of wonder can lead to feeling overwhelmed, humbled, and excited. This sense of wonder may correlate to a high tolerance for uncertainty, which can help us turn potentially frustrating experiences we have into teachable moments and learning opportunity. Developing intercultural competence is a complex learning process. At the basic level of learning, we accumulate knowledge and assimilate it into our existing frameworks. But accumulated knowledge doesn't necessarily help us in situations where we have to apply that knowledge. Transformative learning takes place at the highest levels and occurs when we encounter situations that challenge our accumulated knowledge and our ability to accommodate that knowledge to manage a real-world situation. In case of Ukraine, intercultural communication and the issue of developing intercultural competence is of paramount importance. In fact, the teachers of foreign languages were the first who realized that effective communication with representatives of other cultures, it is not sufficient to be able to communicate freely. And the necessity of second language acquisition and bilingual education emerged. Practical communication with foreigners proved that even deep knowledge of a foreign language does not exclude misunderstanding with native speakers. So today it's a common knowledge that building and strengthening ties with representatives of other cultures is just impossible without knowledge of the specifics, these cultures, and practical skills in intercultural communication. As part of the secondary education reform, the Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine plans to introduce bilingual education in high schools. Bilingual education means two languages, Ukrainian and English language, and it is about bilingual teaching of those subjects that students will choose as their specialty. It has been planned that in high schools, the specialized subject will be taught bilingually. The development of bilingual education is included in the Education 4.1 Ukrainian program. It's the name of the program, which provides for a large-scale reform of the Ukrainian education system. Considering everything mentioned and with the aim to prepare students for effective intercultural communication, a new academic discipline, intercultural communication, was introduced in higher educational establishments in Ukraine. It means that the knowledge of a foreign language is supplemented with knowledge of the peculiarities of culture, covering a wide range of topics. So thus, the Department of Intercultural Communication and Translation was created at Franko National University of Lviv, where I am from, to serve the needs of students in the sphere of intercultural competences and intercultural communication in general. It means that the knowledge of a foreign language is supplemented with knowledge of peculiarities of the culture, covering a wide range of topics, as I have already mentioned. It goes without saying that intercultural competence and intercultural communication is a tool to be used towards an effective dialogue among world leaders, politicians, diplomats, and people in general. So, but in case of Ukraine and in our today's reality, the issue of intercultural communication is extremely crucial, as millions of Ukrainians were forced to leave their homes due to Russian full-scale invasion started on the 24th of February in 2022, and in total more than 8 million of Ukrainian refugees were registered across Europe. So that's why it's not so easy for people to find themselves in a completely new environment. So as the number is more than 8 million people, so thousands of them are in different countries across the world, such as Poland, Germany, Italy, Spain, the United States, the United Kingdom, Greece, and Cyprus as well. And every single day we express our gratitude to every country, every person who stands with us and supports us in this difficult time. So finally, it can be mentioned once again that intercultural communication and intercultural competence is a relatively recent development in foreign language teaching, which might be considered in more depth in Ukraine, as Ukraine is a kind of microcosm of Europe and other multilingual and multicultural societies, and faces the same potential problems of understanding and communication among different ethnic, religious, and other groups. Intercultural competence and dialogue need to be developed in education institutions at all levels. So there is no single doubt left that intercultural communication is a valuable asset today, where connections around the world have become commonplace. This is where intercultural competence comes in useful and is a must in today's world. So that was like a brief and short outline of the main aspects of intercultural communication in general, intercultural competences in particular, some examples from our life, and a guide over or around different countries and peculiarities related to intercultural communication. So I would be more than happy if there will be any questions, any comments from you